A woman's strength begins where her habit of being convenient ends, when she stops adjusting to other people's moods, when she no longer dims her light so as not to disturb anyone. This decision rarely comes easily. It brings fear, as if without being convenient, love will disappear. But in reality, this is the first step to true freedom. To break free from the role of savior means refusing to carry other people's lives on your shoulders. No longer listening to stories that end the same way every time. No longer rescuing those who don't want to change their own reality. This is not cruelty. This is maturity. Because help that becomes a habit stops being kindness and becomes dependency. Emotional slavery begins with, I must be good. I must be calm, gentle, understanding, even when it hurts, even when they ignore me, use me, or betray me. But a woman who chooses strength stops pleasing others. She doesn't beg. She doesn't convince. Her voice sounds different, firm, but not loud. And most importantly, she rebuilds her priorities, not around relationships, not around other people's comfort, but around herself, her growth, her depth. Because when a woman begins to live at the center of her own life, everything unnecessary starts to fall away, and everything real is drawn closer. A woman who has embraced her strength stops explaining herself, not because she has nothing to say, but because she no longer needs someone else's understanding to be herself. This decision is painful, but liberating, because it cuts the last thread of dependency on other people's approval. To stop explaining means to stop justifying your pain, your decisions, your changes. This is freedom that those around you don't immediately understand. But a woman living from her depths no longer bargains for acceptance. She doesn't explain why she lost interest, why she doesn't respond, why she no longer goes where she's ignored. The strength of silence. This is not resentment. This is a sign of maturity, because those who want to understand will understand without words, and those who are used to demanding explanations won't hear even the most sincere ones. A woman who has chosen herself knows silence is also a language of self-respect. This decision changes the boundaries of communication. She no longer continues conversations where she's devalued, doesn't return to dialogues where she's forced to justify herself, because a woman who has stopped explaining no longer fights for what should be natural. Respect. A woman's strength begins where clinging ends, clinging to a person, to a situation, to an idea that's long been dead. This is not about indifference. This is about maturity that no longer confuses love with holding on. A woman who has stopped clinging chooses not to grasp. She chooses to let go. Leaving behind the fear of loss is a painful but honest path, because behind the fear of losing, there's almost always the fear of being left without meaning. A woman who decides not to cling meets this fear face to face, and suddenly discovers everything that's truly hers doesn't go anywhere, and everything that disappears was already lost. She just didn't want to admit it. Inner permission is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. It's when you allow the world to be as it is, not trying to hold on to what's leaving, not freezing in the past, not building illusions. A woman who lets go doesn't lose. She frees up space, and into this space, something new arrives. Not because she asked for it, but because she's ready, because someone who stops clinging, stops creating tension, and then life begins to flow differently, calmer, purer, deeper. A woman's strength blossoms when she stops living by other people's scripts, when she stops asking, what's right, and starts asking, what's truly mine. The decision to listen to yourself is not about selfishness. It's about honesty, trust in intuition. This is not mysticism. This is that inner silence where the truthful voice sounds. A woman who has chosen herself stops seeking confirmation from the outside. She doesn't need advice for every step, because she begins to feel, if it's calm inside, it's right. The strength of inner no is the foundation of freedom. A woman who has learned to say no where she used to endure experiences for the first time the taste of true consent, because her yes is no longer from fear, not from duty, but from deep agreement with herself. Exiting the world of other people's expectations is coming home. A woman no longer tries to be convenient, beautiful, understandable. She simply is, in her own rhythm, in her own desires, in her own truth. And this is what makes her truly attractive, because she doesn't live to please. She lives to be herself. A woman's strength begins to grow the moment she stops being convenient, when she's tired of smiling out of politeness, agreeing out of fear, pretending everything's fine just so she won't upset anyone. This decision may seem harsh, but in reality, it's a return to herself. For too long, women have lived in a world where being good is almost an obligation. Don't offend. Don't argue. Don't fall out of the picture. Hold back your feelings. Do as you're asked. And maybe they'll love you. But this is not love. This is conditioning. A woman who has chosen herself begins to remove these masks. And the first thing she notices, she becomes inconvenient. Inconvenient for those who are used to using her kindness, for those who knew she would always adjust, for those who considered her silence as agreement. But with this inconvenience comes not loneliness, but freedom. Only the habit of bending doesn't go away immediately. It's grown into the skin, into speech, into movement. A woman choosing freedom learns to stand straight, not in the sense of aggression, but in the sense of dignity. She looks at the world differently, as someone who has the right to her own feelings, her own desires, her own no. And this no sometimes sounds for the first time. It may be fragile, trembling, but it contains more strength than 1,000 yeses said out of fear. A woman who has decided to no longer be convenient doesn't become harsh. She becomes real, and this authenticity is her strongest protection. There are women who know how to be there for others, but don't know how to be there for themselves, who comfort, care for, save everyone, except themselves. And in this forgetting of self lies the root of exhaustion, resentment, and inner emptiness. Strength begins with a different decision: to be with yourself, not betraying yourself for the sake of others. Refusing to seek support from the outside is a step into silence. When it becomes clear, no one will come and make you whole. No one will heal the pain you've kept for years under a mask of a smile. A woman who has decided to be with herself stops seeking salvation in love, in recognition, in someone else's hands, because for the first time she feels the support is already there. It's her, building an inner home. The process is gentle and lengthy. A woman stops scolding herself, blaming herself, shaming herself. She begins to be kind not only to others, but to herself. She asks herself, how do I feel? What do I need right now? What am I tired of enduring? And in this attention to herself, the most important thing is born: trust. Stability doesn't come immediately. First anxiety, then silence, and then suddenly, peace arrives, without explanations, without guarantees, just a feeling. I'm here with myself. I'm not running away. I'm not betraying. I'm not abandoning. A woman who has chosen to be herself doesn't become lonely. She becomes full. And then the question no longer arises: who will fill the emptiness? Because there is no emptiness anymore. There's an inner foundation on which everything rests. There's something exhausting about trying to prove you're worthy of love, trying to be better, softer, more beautiful, justifying someone's rudeness so as not to seem difficult, explaining your no so as not to be rejected. A woman who has chosen strength one day makes a decision, no more proving anything. It all begins with awareness. If you have to convince someone of your value, you've already lost. Because a real connection doesn't require effort to be seen. Those who are capable of truly loving see you immediately, and they don't ask you to become a convenient version of yourself. The decision to no longer prove is liberation from the eternal need to be understood, from the endless pursuit of deserving. A woman stops justifying her feelings, her desires, her boundaries. She no longer argues with those who don't hear her, because she knows true value is not proven, it's felt. This knowing I am enough doesn't shout. It's quiet, calm, but in it, enormous strength. A woman stops imposing herself, running, explaining. If she's not chosen, she doesn't force herself. If she's not heard, she doesn't scream. Only she becomes the one whose silence speaks louder than words. Not because she's offended, but because she's tired of fighting for a place in someone's life. And in this silence, maturity, because her life no longer depends on someone else's recognition. Sometimes a woman can live her whole life without feeling her body, ashamed of it, scolding it, punishing it with hunger or exhausting it with diets, comparing it to others, hiding it, ignoring signals of fatigue, all in an attempt to be right, worthy, acceptable. But strength begins with a different decision, to return to the body. The body is not an enemy, it's a home, a place where every emotion, every memory lives. A woman choosing herself learns to feel again, not only pain, but pleasure, not only tension, but relaxation. She stops living from her head. She begins to listen, where she's tight, where she's frozen, where she wants warmth. Acceptance of her nature is not about perfect forms. It's about recognition. I have the right to be, with all the curves, with tired hands, with wrinkles by the eyes. A woman stops fitting into standards because she feels herself from within, and there is life. Connection with the body returns strength, because intuition is stored in it. Wisdom lives in it. When to go, when to stop, when to lie down and just breathe. A woman who has returned to her body no longer allows others to cross her boundaries, because she feels these boundaries with her skin. It's through this connection with herself that healing comes, not from books, not from advice, but from the body. A woman begins to dance, to touch herself with respect, to look in the mirror without disgust, and in this acceptance, a radiance is born, one that can't compare to any cosmetics, because this radiance is from within. Waiting is an invisible form of self-betrayal. It starts small, waiting for them to write, to call, to remember. Then it imperceptibly expands, waiting for changes, waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to understand without words. And then suddenly you realize life is passing not in actions, but in constant tension, as if your heart is hiding in a corner, afraid to move. A strong woman is not the one who succeeded in everything. It's the one who stopped postponing herself for later, who one day understood it's not love if you have to mentally return to it 100 times and count other people's actions. It's not friendship if you're more tired from it than from loneliness. It's not care if it requires waiting at the door until someone else finds it convenient. So she stops living in pause mode, no longer hangs between messages, doesn't check online status, doesn't build her life around someone else's schedule, because the one who constantly waits is forever standing on the threshold and never enters her own home. Now she makes the choice herself, not from fear of being alone, but from respect for herself. She stops postponing joy, begins to say yes to what she wants, and no to what exhausts her. She no longer waits for someone to confirm her significance. She knows it. A woman who has refused to wait doesn't become indifferent. She becomes free. Her heart still knows how to love, but no longer allows love to control her. She doesn't chase attention because she's learned to be attentive to herself. Such a woman no longer clings because she understood, if something is meant to come, it will find a way. And if it doesn't find a way, it wasn't meant for her. And life is too short to spend it on platforms where no one promised to arrive. The world is used to the image of a woman who fights for attention, for relationships, for someone's loyalty. But true inner strength begins with awareness. Love is not war, not a trophy, not a competition, not an achievement. Real love is a meeting of two people who don't need to pretend. The one who grew up in waiting and pain often doesn't notice how she turns love into proof of her own necessity, how she begins to compete, compare, deserve. But a moment comes when everything changes. She suddenly understands. She doesn't have to explain to anyone why she deserves to be near them, because dignity is not an argument. It's a state. From this moment on, she no longer fights, doesn't explain her value, doesn't compete with other women, because a woman who knows her worth doesn't enter the race. And then a woman begins to speak differently. Not with her voice, with her actions, not with requests, with distance. She doesn't make scenes, doesn't accuse, doesn't take revenge. She simply steps aside, silently, because she understood. Silence is not weakness. It's an answer. The most honest, the most mature, and the strongest answer. A woman doesn't stop loving, but she begins to love herself a little more. Enough not to justify that she's hurting. Enough not to be ashamed of her vulnerability. Enough not to explain her value. The choice of self. This is not a loud declaration. This is a quiet but powerful decision. A decision that comes after many times, when you gave too much, when you adjusted, saved, endured, until one day you understood, no one will save you except you. A woman who has chosen herself is not the one who no longer loves. It's the one who stopped betraying herself for the sake of someone else's comfort. She's not angrier and not colder. She's more honest. Honest in not being where she's not valued, not waiting for someone to change, not hoping that her pain will be noticed if she endures just a little more. Now she doesn't chase those who leave, doesn't run after those who are silent, doesn't look for reasons behind someone else's indifference, because she stopped explaining to herself why she's being ignored. She's more interested in the question, why did I allow this? She removes from her life those who make her doubt her value, doesn't take revenge, doesn't accuse. She simply exits the game in which the rules weren't written by her. And each such step is a return to herself, to who she was before she learned to be too convenient. Now she lives from her inner center, listens not to other people's words, but to her own feeling, and builds relationships not for salvation, but for reciprocity. She doesn't need, she chooses, doesn't wait. She goes, doesn't break, she changes direction, and in this choice, all her strength. Because a woman's strength begins with one decision, to be herself, even if it's inconvenient, not for everyone, but truly for herself. And before you leave, take one simple step, like this video. Let these thoughts find those who need them right now. Subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about what truly matters, about life, about fear, about how to find yourself amid the noise of the world. Thank you for being here. You've already taken the first step. You've looked inside yourself. Remember, True freedom doesn't begin when obstacles disappear. It begins when you stop waiting for permission to be yourself.